The news overnight has been fairly significant. Obviously, the announcement by Novak that he has been granted a medical exemption, and that exemption affords him the opportunity to come into Australia, come into Victoria, and compete at the Australian Open. So he's currently on a flight on his way here and gets here sometime today. I wouldn't mind just quickly going through again what we discussed this morning, a little bit on the process and how we've got to this point. We have been saying from the beginning that anyone coming into Australia or coming onto the grounds on the Melbourne Park precinct would have to be vaccinated or would have to have a medical exemption and approved by a medical practitioner or by a medical panel. And we set up, Tennis Australia set up the first panel, and that panel was designed, made of independent doctors, epidemiologists, was designed to assess any application that was received. They were blind applicants that were received. In other words, no one knew who the applicant was. That was reviewed and assessed and then passed on to the second panel, which was set up by the government for further assessment. That's not a process that the normal, an Australian coming home or anyone coming into Australia, that would not be the process. Simply they would have to apply directly to medical practitioners to have their name eventually added to the Australian Immunisation Register. And when that gets added, then you for all intents and purposes, considered vaccinated, and you can get the green tick that all of us have as vaccinated individuals. There were 26 applicants through the process. There's a handful which were provided with an exemption, and that handful, that information only gets disclosed by those individuals on the grounds of which they were provided an exemption. That's personal, private, confidential medical information that we are not at liberty to share publicly. But it's very clear on the ATAGI guidelines, it's very clear on what conditions you would receive an exemption on. And to briefly, quickly summarize those, one of them is obviously having an adverse response to any kind of vaccine and having something like an anaphylactic response. Another one is if you've just had major surgery and may or may not be suffering from myocarditis. And another one is you're a recovered case. In other words, you've had evidence of COVID and certified evidence of COVID over the past 6 months. If you meet any of that criteria, then it's assessed by the medical team, and Dr. Broderick can provide some of that information, but it's assessed by the medical panel, both panels, and if it's granted, then you're given an exemption, and then that becomes communication between the applicant and the panel at that point. So the process has been very clear, and we completely understand and empathise with first of all, some people being upset about the fact that Novak has come in because of his statements over the past couple of years around vaccination. However, it's ultimately up to him to discuss with the public his condition if he chooses to do that and the reason why he received an exemption. We as an event, also as a state and as a country, will do everything we possibly can to give everyone an equal and fair opportunity to come into the country. And if they come in through the guidelines that are set forth and the conditions of which they can compete, then they're granted with an exemption. The majority of players and the majority of people on site are vaccinated because, again, to come into the grounds and all our patrons coming in, the critical workforce, the players coming in will have to show, through the QR code, will have to show the service through the Services Vic app, will have to show the green tick. And you also get that green tick if you're medically exempt. So we don't single out someone if they're medically exempt, and that applies not only to players, their support staff, and fans as well. And that's the right process. And we're confident with what we put forward, and in close partnership with the Victorian government. And tennis has gone above and beyond what would normally be required coming into the country. So and coming into Victoria and on the precinct. So with that, I think I'll hand it over to Joel if there's anything else. Thank you.
Great, thanks Craig, and good morning everyone. I want to start by acknowledging what an incredibly challenging couple of years the Victorian community have been living through, and indeed, here we are again in a period that is somewhat anxiety-inducing and really challenging for people, as we see the case numbers increasing with the Omicron variant. So I want to recognise and acknowledge that this outcome is something that many in the Victorian community will find frustrating and upsetting, but I want to make absolutely clear that, as has been the case the whole time, no one is or will be receiving special treatment because of who they are or what they have achieved professionally. That our overarching imperative through the pandemic now for 2 years, and in relation to the hosting of all our big events, including in this instance the Australian Open, has been the safety of the Victorian community, the health and wellbeing of the Victorian community. And so for participants, whether they're players, the workforce, those attending to watch a great match, the overarching imperative here is to ensure the safety of all people. Now, Craig has provided with you some detail about how the process has worked, and so what Novak, his experience and that of a handful of other people who have applied through this process has demonstrated is the ability to satisfy not just the Commonwealth Government's requirements for entry, but something well above and beyond that. So for any Victorian resident, Victorian citizen who wants to go to the pub, or in many cases go to work, and needs to demonstrate their vaccination status and have that green tick that we're all so familiar with, they have to meet a very narrow set of criteria that are determined by ATAGI. That is what has happened in this case, but in relation to the panel process, this is vastly more robust again. So instead of going to a doctor that you know and that you perhaps know well and that knows you, the applicants have had their information redacted, so it's all de-identified. They're considered by not one doctor that you know, but 6 doctors that you don't. So I just want to provide people with an assurance that the imperative to keep participants in this event and spectators at this event and the workforce safe has always been utmost in our plans and preparations. We thank Tennis Australia for putting in place a more robust process than has existed for anybody else entering the country or participating in any of the other activities that we know and enjoy. And I look forward to a really successful tournament where, we are the major events capital, and we have an amazing and exciting calendar, and we will continue with this program of events and keeping the economy open and enabling people to do the things that they've all earned and to enjoy them and to do so safely. And we will continue to hold that mantle of major events capital, and I hope everyone enjoys the tennis this summer.